and I didn't come to India thinking, can I find something here, something new here? But the nature of religious art is that it's very heartfelt, a lot of feeling, and so, there was this immediate connection.
Was that closeness, was that an element that you liked out of publishing, like working closely with the artists? And
that's with the publishing also. Working with the first artists we worked with, I would mix up a jar of sugar lift, and we would, sit with them, and we would talk, and they would paint plates, and or cover a plate with soft and that they were drawn, and it was very like Donald Batchelor when he made his first prints with us. He made his first etchings with me actually before we began to work together. He said, "I'd like to work on square plates." I said, "What size?" He said, "Oh, about like this," and I measured between his fingers about 8 inches square. So I went to New York Central, and they had plates that were 8 by 10, 9 by 12, 11 by 14. So I bought the 8 by 10s, and I cut them with a hacksaw, and one edge was all crooked, but that was fine. And I didn't know that there were machines that could chop the plates, and doing this all myself. I couldn't. I didn't have an aquatint box. I used spray paint to do a phony, mist of spray paint as an aquatint, and I would put them in the acid and just leave them. I didn't know about measuring. Way too strong. I would hear like knocking, and it was the plate. Because there was such bubbling, because it was so strong, and the aquatint, the spray paint would pop off, and I would respray, and I would stick my hands in without gloves, and at one point, all the skin started peeling off my hands, and it was very
hands-on, to say the least.
It was in some review in
Print
Collector's Newsletter that they said, looked like they were made on the kitchen tabletop. So that's what I liked. I liked this intimacy.
But they were.
And this is why when I brought them to museums, these were the years of big, very technically sophisticated prints from big publishers, and this was something so different that I was bringing. And, they were editions of 12, and, everything was very
endearing, but nobody knew about it.
Yeah, very homey.
Also, like Michael Baron, Donald Batchelor,
Note Vital.
Nobody knew about them really. So, very little.
Well, no, in all the cases, it was their first etching.
How do you feel like that translates in terms of the Indian prints? Many of the artists is unknown, and how did that change?
Well, see, there wasn't that connection until later, because the first prints we saw on our first trip were prints from the 1940s, 50s. We went into an old shop, and they drew us in. We loved them, but part of what we loved was that they were fun. There was little kitschy quality, so it was somewhat a fun thing. And it was as we it was a gradual process, and over the course of many trips, and learning more and finding the more serious, dealers, and then eventually, finding the rural areas where still find them.
And we took 13 trips altogether, so over the course of 22 years. So it's a long process, and we evolve little by little.
Yeah, so a gradual process of, over time, to get to the point where we were finding the earlier ones that were very intimate, that had this same quality of some artists drawing on a lithostone or engraving a wood block, and then at a certain point, it completely connected. What I was seeing at a certain point, but it took a while, was I loved as much, was certainly as interesting to me as my favorite art of any area, of any time, of any sort,
It's a big statement.
But yeah. No, that actually happened when I came into, and this was years after our first. I don't know how many trips after our first trip, when we went to the Indian Museum in Calcutta. We saw a woodblock, engraving of Kali from the 1850s or 60s. That changed everything for me, because that, for me, was so powerful and so powerfully beautiful. It had the same impact on me. Then it became the Indian prints at their best, became as important as anything in art.
And he became totally obsessed and passionate about
Yeah,
it.
yeah,
more,
yeah.
more than, I mean, I love them and everything, but that's Mark's, not a hobby, but like passion and totally devoted
It's hard.
to
I
his
don't
friends.
have. I'm too compulsive obsessive to have hobbies, so I've never.
But it's
I've
good
never had a
because
hobby, but I've had a lot of
collectors
passion.
need to be passionate and obsessive and compulsive also. I mean, and there's a lot of that also in collecting. I mean, some of our best clients were compulsive, obsessive collectors. So.
No, the way Elise has put it, like I didn't think that we would ever be able to own one of these Calicut Cali relief prints, but the way Elise puts it, I become like a dog with a bone, where it's like I have this obsession.
He won't let go.
And so I mean, and eventually we did own one, and incredibly to it.
But I do believe also there was some kind of like us going to India, finding the prints. There was also something like almost like it was meant for us to be. I don't know if you can explain logically why, but I mean,
well, strange
things happen. Like we would go on a road to look for antique dealers, and then somehow we would make a mistake, and we would be drawn to this other place, and then right there we would find something fantastic. Or like little boys like telling us where to go, in the market to look for prints, like I don't know what it is, but there was a few things like that where there were like turning points and we turned the right way, or
I think
interesting.
Really. On the very first trip, we were in a market in Mysore, and these little kids come up to you and they say, "Oh, what country are you from? Do you have a coin from your country? What's your name?" And very friendly, and normally you just kind of like no one pays so much attention. You kid around with them a little bit and finished, and instead this little kid came up to me and said that, and I said, "Listen, we're looking for these prints." I explained to him, and this little boy, how old was he? Maybe 8, 7, 7. I don't know, 7 years old or so. Took me by the hand once I explained, and he took me down, one street and down an alley and around a corner, and I thought, well, where are we going? And he took me to some little print dealer in a little stall somewhere. And, these dealers would always have new ones on the wall, but
an old inventor.
If you asked about old ones, they would have a stack of old ones tied with string, so the string was like eating into the edge of the prints, little.
At the worst,
and things like that happened over and over, where it's almost as if.
Or like when we were interested in some prints, but we missed it at auction, and then a few years later, the same print came back. It's a long story, but I mean, basically, it's almost like we were not able to buy them the first time, but the second time we were given a second chance, on the.
A lot of incidents like this where it's almost as if the things came to us. I don't know.
Or is it hard work?
I'm not saying that there was any divine intervention, but it almost seemed like that sometimes.
We were encouraged, in our search, for sure.
What was the conversation between you two at the end of that first trip?
Oh, we were hooked. We were hooked by it. We loved India, but we were basically trying to figure out our new life and what we would do. We were going to open again a new gallery in Chelsea, and then we realized, well, this was fun to be able to go for 2 months, travel around without, I mean, we knew it was not, we were not able to repeat that, but we just thought that freedom was something that, we lacked before with the gallery.
Well, we thought we were not able to repeat that, but the fact is we came back and became, after 3 years, after 2 years, and then every year, and made 13 trips.
But because we didn't have the gallery, we decided not to open the gallery again, so that's the thing, and to work as private dealers. And so.
Yeah. In the film, it's made very clear that the prints were made to be used, and there was an ephemeral quality to them. And we also see all those wonderful scenes of you in back rooms with the flashlights through the dusty things. I mean, do you have a sense of like why some were saved?
It's a miracle because they were printed on acidic paper. They were frame pressed against the glass with cardboard or wood behind them. this is in a country where, like in Calcutta, for instance, where earlier prints are from, the average humidity is over 70% year-round. During the monsoon, it's 100% for, I don't know, 2-3 months. There are plenty of, like when we unframe prints, we would see silverfish, all the time, run away as we pick up the backboard. I mean, that's if we could pick up the backboard. Very often the prints are glued down to a piece of cardboard. So they just, most have not survived. Most have not survived. I mean, the further back you go, the smaller percentage, of course, have survived. And when you go back to the mid-19th century, almost nothing has survived.
Like in India, also, like at the end of the year, you burn, like for Pongal, like a different festival, you burn the old clothes, you burn everything and start fresh,
Yeah, I don't know if they burn the religious images.
No, they don't burn the religious images, but they want to get new images. Therefore, like this concept of new is not a problem, anyway for them. So the old one got left behind basically, but they are not like meant to be used anymore, and that's how we were able to.
Yeah, if there's damage to the image.
Right. If the god was damaged, like that was like you couldn't pray to it. You still can't. I mean, it's the same
big,
thing.
Serious moisture staining along the bottom, a corner missing, holes. None of that matters. But if there's damage to the face of the god, then that's the end of it. Is dealers strictly in these prints don't exist normally in India, but we found one of the very few in Mysore during one of the very early trips, and he had two beautiful prints of Hanuman, monkey god, very early prints, and I mean early for us at that point. And one was completely missing a corner, the other was in perfect condition, relatively speaking. And we asked the price, and they were the same price. And I said, well, how can they be the same price? This one's missing a corner. And he said,
it's a big chunk like
this.
Yeah,
big. He said, but the god is not damaged. And he didn't understand why that should bother us, to have, a good part of the corner missing in one of them. But you were asking also about like a moment when our thinking about them changed. And I was telling you about when I discovered first saw that Cali print. There was also a moment that we were, I said to Elise, whatever we were talking about, I sort of went off, into thinking about these prints. And I said to her, these are really important because up until that point, we discovered the prints from the 50s and 40s, and then once in a while one from the 20s, and I realized there was this history, and I sort of, I don't know, it all of a sudden changed. And then there was a time that there are very, very few antique shops in India, but we were in a town called Pondicherry, and there was an antique shop with a bunch of old prints, and we bought a group of them, and we went for lunch several streets away. And in the middle of lunch, I said, I have to get the rest of these prints. And I left the restaurant and ran back to the antique shop. Now, these had been sitting there for I don't know how long, but it was the feeling that if I waited another 20 minutes, they would be gone. I ran back to the antique shop and I bought, just about all the prints that they had in this group. It was like a little stack.
But what year was that?
Oh, that was way back. I mean, these are prints.
Trip, though, I don't think.
Maybe the second trip. These are not prints that would be considered terribly important to us, even a few trips later. But
well, it was this idea also maybe that we could sell them, bring them back here and sell them. In the very beginning, we didn't think about that. We were just buying them for ourselves, So
but it's like
it evolved like over the years.
Yeah, I mean they were very inexpensive, and it's like I wanted to get them out of the shop. I just felt, I don't know, something more needs to be done with them. So, and even from the beginning, we would give some to. Like I remember we gave some of those to the New York Public Library, and so it was the idea of like, I don't know, I just felt There was
should
also
be known here. They should be known here, basically.
with the feeling that somehow that they're going to disappear because we sourced so many that were in such terrible condition, and
the art world, the print world, culture
Right,
would be
right.
well served if more people felt empowered to pursue those kinds of interests, right? Because I'm sure many of us have had inklings like that and then came up with some reason not to do it, and so I think that's a really powerful aspect of your story.
This is something I actually have never thought about this. I don't think I've thought about this before, but however many years earlier, we were buying works once in a while by young artists whose work we loved, but I could not buy early Joseph Beuys drawings or Louise Bourgeois works that I loved or whatever, or
we bought prints.
Manzoni or Yves Klein or whatever. And with the Indian prints, money would make no difference. I mean, if we were wealthy, which we are not, it wouldn't have made it any easier to form the collection we formed. It was not at all about that. It was about finding things which took a certain detective work, traveling all around, searching, little villages, towns. So that, we loved also because it was an adventure that we could take part of, very different than, what collecting would be otherwise.
I remember going in Shekhawati, very rural Rajasthan, northern Rajasthan, going on this little road, where you see camels going back home after their wherever they were going, and this music, Rajasthani music blasting from the driver, and this beautiful lunar landscape almost. And it's like, my God, I can't believe we're doing this.
It was really an adventure.
Just feeling this incredible adventure, really. Every day we wouldn't know where we would go, what we would find, and sometimes we would find wonderful things, in the middle of you see us going clack clack clack, with the so once in a while we would find a gem, something really super rare, but it took days, to get to that. So,
yeah, I have to tell you also, the scene
that is a big adventure in a way.
The scene in Rachel's film where we go into this, I go into this little space with a flashlight and I'm looking through a stack. We would never normally look in space like that because there's no chance of finding anything. It's all, things from 1940s, 50s, 60s, 70s.
The portrait of Robert Kennedy.
Yeah, it could be anything in those frames. That was a photo op for Rachel, When we arrived in Bombay, we would see prints from the 1940s, 50s in old shops. We wanted to find prints like that. We found the print dealers. They were selling brand new ones, but then we traveled for a couple of months. We found little print dealers in towns, villages, in Kerala and Tamil Nadu, and they would, have new ones on the wall, but a stack of old ones. Occasionally be something from the 20s, and then we wanted to find antique dealers, not old print dealers, which are very hard to find. We did a bit of research. By the third trip, we discovered there was an area called Chettinad in South India that was very wealthy up until World War II, through the 19th century. Then things change, becomes a ghost town. Then things come out of the homes and antique dealers spring up. There were these golden years during which we were able to buy beautiful prints from the 1920s. I mean, eventually, of course, they disappeared there, but this is sort of an oversimplification, but it really started in Calcutta in the mid-19th century. And so we went to Calcutta and we couldn't find anything there. And we had to, we didn't know what to do, of course, how to find these early Calcutta prints if we ever could. Studied a little bit the history of Calcutta, found that there was a community of merchants, the Moraris, which originally were from Rajasthan, that became, very, very successful business people in Calcutta in the 19th century, and they built fantastic homes back in Rajasthan, in the area they were from. It's sort of a rural area in north west Rajasthan, Shekhawati and Jejunu and Churu. So we went there, but of course, we got there and there are no antique shops. It's just a rural area, and how do you even begin? There were many dealers there we eventually found, but because there's nothing else to do there, but they were all private, private dealers. Our driver also, everyone there, because there's not much happening. As I said, they're very entrepreneurial, so they're very eager to, if they have any idea, they'll make the call and try to, find somebody who can make another call. And so I remember our driver calling someone and in Marari, Ravi Chorbagan, the names that he knew from, what we had said to the, one or two dealers that we had visited. And going into a field in the middle of nowhere and meeting some guy who then would get on his phone and call somebody else who would, and we would,
like a drug dealer.
Getting now dark, we would go to, some dealer really, really rural with a barn with a dirt floor and things running around, that we didn't want to know,
no electricity, right?
With a flashlight, looking through these prints, and then, little by little, we found the earlier and the earlier, and through detective work, sort of trying to find a dealer who knew a dealer who knew a dealer, Before, so this is Shekhawati area of Rajasthan. When we would go to Chettinad, where there were actually antique shops, the dealers would have very often 3 prints or so above their desk, and they would have a tilak on the glass on the forehead of the god, which meant that an incense in front, which meant that they used these for their worship. We would never ask about those. It was understood that you don't ask about those.
In Shekhawati also, sometimes.
In Shekhawati also.
Even in that little barn, there was one print, and it was sunset, and then suddenly he had to. The merchant had to pray to Hanuman, so he said, "Can we please stop for a minute?" And he was ringing the bell and praying to Hanuman, lighting incense.
And you never ask about that. Actually, when that happened, this dealer, we selected a number of prints, and we asked the price, and I thought the price was pretty high. And I started to argue with him, and then, sunset, and he does his puja, and his god is Hanuman. Everyone, all Hindus have a certain god that they choose as their god, right? The Hanuman. He does this long thing called the Hanuman Chalisa. It's on and on and on. And I don't remember, I sort of said a little bit of it with him, because I know that a little bit. I'm sorry. It's emotional thinking about these times, because there were such special times. And after that, the whole situation so changed, where he had these soft eyes, and he said, "Oh, I can give it to you for less, these prints." And I said, "No, the price is fine." And he said, "No, it was complete reversal." So I don't know, very special times.
But people are very impressed when you were starting to recite the Hanuman Chalisa, which is not easy when you don't know the language. You just have to memorize it.
And when you were saying you're researching and finding out more about them, how.
That's a good question.
How were you doing that? Where
this is not easy. For instance, we would make the trips in December, January. I would sit on the beach during the summer in Jones Beach, and I would, with my notebook, try to design a better system for bringing the prints back, because they're very fragile. And I was just thinking about them all the time. I have read through these street directories, Bengali street directories from 1881, 1882, 1883, 1880, it's the dry, and I sit on the beach, Jones Beach, reading through this. It's the driest thing you can imagine. Right. Renata Street, number 1, so-and-so, number 2, so-and-so, number 3, names that are completely meaningless, I can tell you, if you went to Calcutta in 1884, I can tell you the hotel, that, I can tell you what was on Beaubazar Street, where to go for this or that, But anyway, so it's this completely absurd work, but I love it.
American institutions, scholars here and in India, what was your perspective on that recognition or more attention being paid?
Pretty much completely. The interaction here with, for instance, museums has been with the Asian departments in museums, not the print and drawing departments or print departments. Yeah. I would like to see that change, but I don't know how that works. We have sold a lot of prints to museums at this point, and always to the Asian departments of those museums. So it makes sense, but I really would like more awareness for the prints among the sort of community that I was interacting with as a publisher,
And there has been more scholarly attention, right? From when you started, right?
Oh yeah,
Yes,
but not enough.
But again, much of that has been in the world of Asian art.
It's. I think it's starting to happen.
There was a show at the International Print Center.
What was the year? Like
in
2008 or 2009?
2009, I believe. And then that show went to the Davis Museum at Wellesley, and then at the Davis Museum, a scholar, Richard Davis, saw the show and came to visit us. And he's a professor of Hindu studies now at Bard. Well, actually, he just retired, but he's written many books about Hindu art and Hinduism. He became very interested, and he told the Asian curator at the Met, John Guy, who's more than just an Asian curator, Kurt Baron, about them. And then the Met purchased a very large group of prints, and then somebody else came who said, oh, there has to be a book about these, and I know a publisher, and so on. And so a book was organized, and little by little, more and more happened here. Eventually Rachel Fetty became interested in making a documentary and so on. So there was this sort of parallel thing happening in India, we discovered the prints from the 40s, 50s, and we became interested, but, our interest only, they were sort of still a fun thing. And then as we discovered the older ones, we became more interested and started forming the collection. And at that time, there was the show at the IPCNY. And then, the Davis Museum, then the Richard Davis book. And then we discovered the Cali print in Calcutta, which, sort of brought it to a whole other, my perception of the prints really changed. And it became a very, very serious a thing for me as any engagement I have in any sort of art, and then
the MFA Boston also.
Then the MFA started to form this big collection, and things meanwhile happened. We would discover more and more in India, and as that evolved, and then Rachel's film, so it would be something in India, something here, something in India, something here, like always, sort of. Like a certain momentum.
But in India also, those prints are starting to be collected in a serious way, but until recently they were not. They were less into paper. This new museum in Bangalore, Abhishek Pada has been collecting prints for a certain amount of years, but it's only starting really now. So, and that, I think that will make a difference. And Jyotindra Jain, he's been also in India. He's been collecting ephemeras and those prints also for a number of years. But there's only very few people basically.
95% of the Indian collectors collected Ravi Varma prints. That's what I call the golden years for us, because when we found earlier prints, we could buy them for nothing because they were not Ravi Varma prints. At a certain point, the Indian collectors started to look further back, and they became very interested in the early Calcutta prints, and everything changed in the early Calcutta prints completely. There were very, very, very few that survived, so those few, impossible to find. We have watched over, a little over 20 years, things really changed, this progression. So it's been really interesting. And we were told by a couple of dealers, we didn't realize it at the time, that when we started collecting, it was just about the time that the Indians started collecting, but collecting Ravi Varma prints, which were never our main interest. So, there are great, great Ravi Varma prints. So, they were very much our interest for a certain number of years, but we,
Less
you know,
so
our
now.
interest kept evolving, kept changing. So now, basically, we don't know where we can find anything. We're interested in the very early prints. We can't find them in India. We don't know if it's possible to find any anywhere. You know, what is still out there.
In the UK.
You know, we found some in the UK brought back by missionaries. So it's really, I mean, there are these incredible stories. Like when I say incredible, I mean, I love the detective work.
So our where we come from is really more like, for me anyway, it's like more like the visual aspect of them. And so,
I mean, to be honest with you, I was practically a high school dropout. I always hated school. I have no, you know, degrees in anything, and what it's like, no academic, far from it. I mean, like,
yeah, but
like
no,
it's a joke to talk about, you know, like, right? And for me, like, for instance, when John Guy, you know, head of Asian at the Met, said, "Can you check these wall texts, you know, for like the show we're doing?" They put several Indian prints. I mean, I thought, like, I can't believe I'm checking wall texts for the Met, you know, and other things like that. You know, there've been a number of things like that.
no, but
And-
when you love something, you go 120%. He's so passionate about things. That's part of his your qualities. It's a field that is so interesting that it should be more studied by students. You know, like and in India also mostly, but I mean in India and in Europe also. I mean, so and here. So we'll see what happens.
Welcome back, everybody. One moment, and we'll bring Mark and Elise. Hello. So I want to welcome back Mark and Elise to the virtual stage to begin our question and answer session. As folks are gathering their thoughts and putting them in the Q&A function, I just want to give a brief reminder for those who haven't gotten the chance to see the film. I hope this very much enticed you to visualize all of these incredibly rich and colorful stories that you just heard. And Rachel Fetty's film allows us to learn about the artistic, the cultural, the political, and the religious contexts of these stunning prints. And you have until this Saturday, April 9th, via the link that you received in the confirmation email. So I will kick things right off. Mark, you talked about sitting on the beach, trying to figure out how to, devise a better system for transporting the prints. We have a question here asking if you could describe how you store prints and what kind of device you came up with.
Sure, we had two different methods, one for smaller prints, one for larger prints. The smaller prints, you have to understand that whatever's done has to be done quickly and sort of very simply on site, because sometimes we're doing this in a field really in the middle of nowhere. And so the smaller prints would go in paper folders. A certain number of those paper folders would go into a heavier paper folder. A certain number of those heavier paper folders would go into like a vinyl sleeve. And those vinyl sleeves would then go into a zipper portfolio, which had sort of a little somewhat elaborate system of stiffeners on either side. So first foam, and then a chipboard, and then wood, and all of this had to be. All of this ended up being a little bit too big for an overhead, on most of the flights we took, but I refused to ever check this. So I would go on planes and put it, right away under my legs, sort of hiding it, and a blanket, over my legs to hide it. And, we would have to hide it when we got onto the plane and off of the plane and so on. And for the larger prints, I developed a system with a very large tube, which had vinyl attached to the tube. So when we unrolled the tube, that vinyl would be flat on the ground. And I had a second piece of vinyl around that to keep the first piece of vinyl clean. So putting paper on the ground, I would unroll it, the vinyl would be there, and on the vinyl was taped sort of folders fanned out like I don't know if you know what I mean by fanned out, but and in those folders were sheets of glassine. So I would be able to quickly push this tube. It would like unroll, the vinyl would stay flat. There would be all these folders. I'd be able to lift them, and there was the glassine, lift the glassine, put in a print, put it down, and then just hit the tube, and it would like roll, and the vinyl would cling to itself and roll up, and I could do all of this very quickly.
And everybody was watching.
Everyone in India
Mark
was
doing
amazed.
this like
Yeah.
a magician.
And then around that
That's
big
very
tube,
funny.
this was a 10-inch diameter tube. Around that tube went foam, which I had, cut so that it could go around the tube, and that there was a certain system for taping that. And then that went in a special bag I designed that went over my shoulder, And that tube went into a duffel bag, and that had to be checked, of course, when we flew.
And those
but-
big prints, they were 28 by 20
28
inches,
by-
so they were
yeah.
pretty big, to carry.
Yeah. It's hard to visualize, from a verbal description. You really need to see it in action, and you see it a little bit in the film, actually. Us working with the tube and the.
Mhm. And here's a question from our friend in Philadelphia, Jessica Silverman. Curious if there's still a holy grail of Hindu prints that you're still hoping to find.
No, finding the relief prints of the Kaligat Kali is nothing beyond that for me. We found 2 of them, and normally I would feel a little funny about owning 2 because there might be a dozen in the world, and I believe they're the only 2 in America, the ones we have. But the reason I don't feel funny about it is because, we've had them conserved in the best possible way.
By Jessica.
Yeah, no, we've had them, Jessica was the conservationist who conserved one of them. She's at the Conservation Center for Art and Historic Artifacts in Philadelphia. The other one was conserved by another conservationist there once Jessica went on to become director, we're really, we make sure in our apartment, we do our best we use humidifiers in the winter and try to keep the humidity down, in the summer with air conditioning always, even if we're not in the apartment. In India, they were disintegrating basically. And one of these 2 we bought in the UK, but one we bought in India. So, I feel we're saving them really, but there's nothing beyond those Kalis for me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And we're another question here. Was wondering if were ever met with any resistance when trying to acquire these works. Was anyone ever reluctant to sell these objects, being religious objects, and knowing that they were, going for a non-religious purpose?
No, the people we've dealt with, even in the most rural areas, they are dealers. So this is what they do. There's in Rachel's film, a historian who's considered really the primary person studying the prints, and who's written quite a bit about him, Jotindra Jain, who was the director of the Folk Art Museum in Delhi. And she asked him what he thinks about us taking these prints out of India. And he said, I think it's wonderful because the objects that are made of metal, that are made of stone, they're going to survive. These prints, if they're kept here, they will disintegrate. And I sort of am a little uncomfortable saying that because it sounds like, almost a little, I don't know, not insulting, but it's sort of a little funny for me to say that in a way, but I can tell you that, whether framed without an airspace in a country with so much humidity, or I've told you about how we would unframe prints and see, sometimes 5 or 6 silverfish running out from, when we lift the backboard, things like this. I don't have any funny feeling about taking them from India and having them cleaned, having them conserved, having tears mended and so on, and doing my best to, store them in the best way I can. And we've, gotten a lot into museum collections where they're,
really taken care of in the best way. So.
Mhm. And then you would discuss both others discussed it in the film, and as you did as well, that it wasn't necessarily that these prints were outside of personal devotional use, that like the study of them wasn't necessarily a large scholarly market there until recent years. Can you describe how you've seen that change? You talked about the Ravi Varma as being a big draw for a long time, but you've seen more recently that this older material is getting more attention.
Yeah, it's really an interesting thing because Ravi Varma is basically an Indian artist who worked in oils on canvas in the European style. And at a certain point, he became such a star, really, a national hero. And, as I said in the film, on the postage stamp and so on, because he made the gods become so real, working in this European style, But for us, that made him, not so interesting. And it's only recently that a few Indian collectors have started to look further back and have discovered the older prints, which for me have something, really uniquely Indian in their aesthetic. And there's now there are some books that have come out in Bengali about some of these prints recently, but it's in the U.S. that the Metropolitan has become very interested. They've bought 102 prints. So they really have made a big commitment. The MFA Boston has bought over 70 prints. There are a couple of people who are working on book projects now here. So in India, there is a new museum in Bangalore has a
good collection.
A nice collection of the prints.
It's called
the Museum of Art and Photography. So it's happening, both here and there. I think there's quite a bit to come, and to come in the next couple of years, but we'll see.
Mm-hmm.
But I think also like in India the prints, contemporary prints are taken seriously, but until now, like earlier prints were not known at all, except in that except like when people were using it as devotional images. So this is a new field completely in India, and frankly they were not taken seriously at all by museum, because I know like the founder of the press of Calcutta Art Studio like offered some prints to
the great grandson of the founder.
The great grandson, the founder of the press, offered prints to I think it was the Delhi Art Museum, and they were not interested. They said no.
This was long ago, though.
Mm-hmm.
But this was
That
long ago.
That was maybe like 20, 30 years ago, but they were not interested at all in getting them as a gift. So that will tell you how little interest there was, and that now it's changing.
These Ravi Varma collectors, until very recently, had no idea of the earlier prints. I mean, we made a Facebook page for the Indian prints called Om from India. And we would get many, many comments from Indians saying, I've been collecting these prints for years and I've never seen anything like these. It was the mid-19th century prints, or even prints from the 1880s, were something completely unknown to most of these collectors. The Ravi Varma prints that are widely known were made in the 1910s and 20s. So in a very different style. So, it's really a very recent thing that the earlier prints have been seriously collected.
Mm-hmm. And I'm going to combine a few questions here. There's been a note, like as you've been speaking, and especially about the kind of ephemeral role of these. Some folks have noted a connection with say, the ukiyo-e, the Japanese woodblock prints that were very much seen and functioned as ephemera until until those of us in Europe and the United States began to see them as art objects. And I was curious, and I know Elise, you have some background with Japanese culture. I was curious if you see any parallels there.
In a way, yes, because when, for instance, I'm always saying telling a little anecdote. When I was living in Japan in the 70s, I lived in an old house, and everybody would bring us old furniture, old ceramic, because they knew we liked old things, but they didn't care for them at all. They wanted to get rid of them. And in a way, the prints, like the ukiyo prints, maybe was the same thing, where the old were not like desirable, and they wanted new art, new things, new objects. And so maybe that's an Asian tradition that is like, there's a parallel there, I mean.
I want to say with the Japanese prints, there's this story that they came to Europe, used as wrapping to wrap ceramics. And this is not true. I don't believe that this is true. I've talked to a number of Asian curators whose specialty are the Japanese prints, and they say this is, not at all true. I don't know what the origin of this story is, but anyway.
Was that a lie travels around the world before the truth gets out of bed? A question in the film, one of the recurring narratives is with contemporary artists, and there's a question if you've seen any interest or support for fine art print shops currently, kind of reviving some of these practices.
There is one fellow, Ashit Paul, who was
In Calcutta.
who became very involved with the old woodblock prints, and he wrote the only book about the old Calcutta woodblock prints, who did find a couple of contemporary woodblock artists and had them copy the old woodblock prints. But of course, there's a very different feeling in the new copies. There's, influence of the prints has appeared in, here and there in different forms. In the film, you see it in the work of Pushpamala and the, Indian artists. But I really don't know so much about Indian contemporary art, so I'm not the person to say. Our friend Peter Nagy could tell you all about that, who used to have a gallery in the East Village in New York and now has one in New Delhi. Nature Mort Gallery, yeah. I don't know much about that.
Well, we are about time. I want to give you the final word, and just kind of ask you what your hopes are for what happens next, especially to an audience of scholars and curators, and then we will thank everybody for their time.
What I hope happens next, I think I mentioned in the interview that at a certain point I began to feel a little removed from the contemporary art world here, and of course became very involved with these Indian prints. And when it got to the point where I, really thought there's something very important here, along with that, right away came the thought that this is something I could bring back and offer, just presenting them so that there could be more awareness here. So what I really hope more than anything else is that they have some exposure here, they have some serious consideration here, and that some people will get at least part of what we've gotten out of them. They've really brought us enormous joy, and I just hope that, this is, I feel, I can, coming back with these, it's like here I have something worthwhile that if I can turn you on to these, it's some worthwhile contribution I can make again, and that's what I'm hoping will happen, and it's not about me, it's about the prints. So.
Thank you. Elise, any parting thoughts?
Well, and also because we're not, we're not specialists, we're not art historians. So we hope that some young student might become passionate about them and study them like the way they should be studied, because they're really quite interesting and so varied. Just the same way the Indian culture is so rich with so many different aspects visually. I feel like, the prints are just the same, like some completely unknown little presses where we'll see just one or two examples, This could be stylistically and historically studied. I don't know how, but I mean, it could be done, I'm sure. So anyway.
Well, they'll be sure to contact you.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you so much.
Thank you all. And if you haven't had the chance to view the film, you have until this Saturday. Thank you all so much for being here. And thank you, Mark and Elise, for sharing your time and stories. Good night, everybody.
Sending love to all, friends watching that I haven't interacted with in 20 years. The curators we love and that haven't been in touch with in a long time. So happy to make this connection.
Wonderful. All right. Good night, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.